be available by close of business today. In addition to this, to the webinar being posted on our YouTube page, we also will provide a copy of the slides from today's presentation, but please note, only Child Care Aware of America slides will be on the website for this presentation, but the full recording will be available on our YouTube page, hopefully by the end of the day today. And with that, I would like to welcome everybody this afternoon, and please welcome our guests from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Sharon Hawa, the Program Manager for Emergency Preparedness and Response, and Lori Nathan, the Deputy Director of Programs and Partnerships. But we are obviously, as always, this webinar is our ongoing monthly CCDBG implementation webinar. And we are very, very happy to have NCMEC as a partner to discuss the importance of child safety. So I actually would like to begin, as always, since there seem to be new participants every month, and I tend to always get a lot of follow-up questions from the field. For those of you, if this is your first webinar, we just want to take a moment to let you know that we are approaching the one-year anniversary of the reauthorization of CCDBG. President Obama signed into law last November, and it was the first reauthorization in 18 years and probably the most comprehensive reauthorization ever in many areas, obviously including health and safety, but as well as better ways to support low-income families and make available better a wider range of child care options for parents and caregivers. So this was probably a great day for child care and child care advocates, but obviously there's much work to be done, especially as states continue to work to get their plans submitted by next March. What I will do is what I always do is I'm just going to briefly run through the what's in the new what the new requirements include in the new law before I actually hand it off to Lori and Sharon for their portion of the presentation. So the new law, as you see on the screen, it does actually establish, basically minimum health and safety requirements on a number of areas. This includes obviously background checks, inspections, obviously inspector to provider ratios, health and nutrition, as well as a statewide child care disaster preparedness plan that must be submitted by March 1st with the statewide plan. Staying on the same subject, for the first time, this law actually includes specific ratio and group size requirements, and obviously it's left up to the state on how to determine the standards for the three bullets you see there on size limits, on provider to child ratios with regards to age, and required qualifications. Now, it is where we want to make it clear that that the CCDBG, while it includes ratio and group size requirements, it does prohibit HHS from requiring the specific provider-child ratios, but it does allow, really, it gives more guidance and more authority to the states on this particular issue. In addition, in addition to health and safety requirements under the new law, obviously a big portion of that is training, and you can see here that by next year, states must certify that they under the following 10 under the 10 subject areas that are listed below, ranging from physical safety, structural safety, first aid, prevention of shaken baby syndrome and abusive head trauma. In addition to that, they must ensure that any provider receiving CCDBG funding, that they have to at least go through or actually complete orientation and pre-service safety trainings as well as ongoing trainings. And they also must include, under the training category, the training actually has to also cover nutrition and physical activity or anything, or any health-related or healthy development-related child issue. And a major new requirement, probably one of the most significant new requirements under new law. I, in particular, have been working on this issue for 7 or 8 years, but I know many of you on the phone, many providers out there have been pushing this as well, especially in the aftermath of some very deadly natural disasters, including Hurricane Katrina. For the first time, all states must have a statewide child care disaster plan, and it must include the following handful of bullets you see here: evacuation and relocation, all the way down to reunifying with the parent and caregiver, ensuring that infants and toddlers, their needs are covered, as well as children with disabilities or a chronic medical condition. And as I mentioned earlier, that when states submit their plans next March, there is a section where they have to indicate that they do have a functioning disaster preparedness plan up and operational, or if they don't have one approved by the governor or by the legislature, they must provide a justification that guarantees it will be up and running by September 30th of 2016. Now, of course, the biggest requirement, or the newest requirement, and probably the most significant requirement, and I say this because without this being addressed, Congress, without the issue of background checks being, or should I say comprehensive background checks being addressed in the reauthorization, there was a very strong chance that Congress probably wouldn't have approved this bill before the end of the last Congress. It's obviously for everybody on the phone, but all providers nationwide, this really goes to our to the commitment of ensuring that children are safe, not only in the presence of the quality of a child care, but also those who are involved and those who work in child care. So as you can see here on the screen, and instead of me reading bullet by bullet, I think the biggest, the date everyone must remember is September 30th of 2017. That's when states must show and prove that they are compliant with the new law, which includes obviously what you see here, as well as what you now see with regards to protections for providers. If a state is not compliant, there is an option to get a 1-year deferment through ACF and HHS. Obviously, the administration folks are, they feel that 2 years from now should be enough time to comply with all the new background checks with regards to the new law. And as you see, a couple of things to point out here, that a candidate, with regards to a background check, a candidate can only be disqualified for a conviction, not an arrest. And we feel that's important to point out, because there has been a lot of confusion as to what would qualify, or what would disqualify somebody from working in child care. It must be based on basically a conviction on the record. An arrest is not viewed as a disqualification for a candidate. And before I hand it over to our friends at NCMEC, I just, as always, want to remind everybody that the state plans are due. It's coming up March 1st. With the exception of background checks, states, and pretty much everything we discussed, must be compliant by September 30th of next year. Obviously, background checks is September 30th of 2017. And as always, because I tend to get, from those of you in the field, I tend to have this question asked. It is not necessary for a state to pass a mirrored or a very similar CCDBG bill in order to comply with new federal requirements. So it's not necessary for a legislature to do that. So I am, of course, moving along. I'm going to hand it off to Lori over at NCMEC, and as always, please, if you have questions, please feel free to enter them in the chat box that you see on your screen. So, Lori?
Great, thanks, Jay. We really appreciate joining you today. And for all of you, I'm just going to give you a brief background about myself and the National Center, and then we'll go directly into some of our safety information, some of our resources, some of the statistics that National Center has been able to calculate over the years related to abduction prevention and things that may affect child care centers across the U.S. And then I'll share the mic with Sharon and I'll pass it along to her so she can talk to you more directly about emergency preparedness and the work that she's done with the National Center related to that issue and how that can impact you as well. So again, my name is Lori Nathan. I've been at the National Center for about 11 years, actually. I had my 11th year anniversary this week. I've been focused primarily on creating general awareness of the National Center and all the resources that we have available, as well as focusing specifically on our prevention materials. And I'll share one of those prevention resources with you in a few minutes. Just to give you a little background about the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which I often just refer to as NCMEC for easier, because it's such a long name. So the National Center has actually, or NCMEC, has been around since 1984. We are, as a result of some congressional mandates and authorizations that we have. And the National Center, we have a 24/7 hotline. So if anyone has any leads about missing children, or if there are any cases of missing children, or law enforcement needs assistance, they can contact our hotline. We also operate the cyber tip line, which is where individuals like yourselves can report any sort of online exploitation that may happen to children, whether it's a online solicitation, whether it's someone comes across a child pornography, anything like that can actually be reported to our cyber tip line. Again, they also are 24/7, and they will turn around and send those reports to the appropriate law enforcement agencies. One of the ways that I always mention NCMEC and how you probably have seen us before, whether it's through CNN, we often are featured there with cases of missing children, but we also, on the back of what you probably receive in your mailbox, is that weekly news and weekly advertisements. Actually, on the back section, we have usually featured 1 to 2 pictures of missing children who may be from your area. And so it's really important for you to kind of take a look at those and see. We do see a lot of family abduction cases, so it's possible that a non-custodial parent has enrolled a child into a child care facility. And so that picture, if someone from a child care facility in your state takes a look at that, it could be crucial information that may be helpful to locate that child and provide that information to law enforcement so they can be reunited with their custodial parent. So again, that's just one thing to kind of take a look at, and one way you may be familiar with NCMEC and our work. Jay, next slide, please. So one of the things that we've also been doing over the years, since about February of 2005, has actually been collecting information about attempted abduction cases. Specifically, we have looked at 9,900 cases from February 2005 to about December of last year. And we've noticed some trends that we really find important to share with folks like yourselves. As you can see here, there's some things about suspects driving vehicles, about 73%. But one of the things that I think you'll find most useful is the 34% occurring between 2 to 7 p.m. So potentially when they come to your facility, children come to your facility after school, or at some point during the day, and then they leave your facility, it's really important to keep in mind that that 2 to 7 p.m. time frame is a time when children are vulnerable because they may be going to or from school, from daycare, childcare, after-school facilities, and may not be necessarily accompanied by an adult. Jay, if you could actually go back to that previous slide, please. Thanks. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. And then we have some statistics about the ages of children, keeping in mind that 10 to 14 years old is pretty vulnerable. I have to say, when I first looked at that number, I was a little shocked. I was expecting the number to be of younger age children. But if you think about it, this 10 to 14-year-old time frame is probably when they're not necessarily accompanied by an adult. So this may be the first time that they're walking to or from school or an after-school activity without a parent. So again, just keeping that in mind when you're thinking about your state child care facilities. Next slide. The good news about attempted abductions, of course, is that these are children who were able to escape and get out of a situation. And we have really important information about how they escaped, and whether it's walking or running away, kicking, yelling, pulling, attracting attention from someone else. One of the big things that we teach children, and I'll talk to you about in a minute, is just using the word no and shouting the word no clearly and loudly so that others around can hear. You know, the one thing that I'm happy about, and also we need to work on a little bit, is that 17% of the incidents involved a Good Samaritan adult who was nearby, who thought maybe the circumstances seemed suspicious and was able to intervene or rescue the child. And I think we kind of need to increase that number. I think as adults we often see things and we may let the situation go. We may not decide to intervene or to react because we think, oh, it's just a child and a parent, and we don't want to get in the middle of that. So I would really urge you and advocate that you as an adult in the community, you know, question these situations, even if it's no big deal and it really is just a child and a parent. It's best if you say something, try to intervene or make a comment to make sure that it's not a situation where a child is actually being abducted forcefully. And next slide, please. So one of the things that we've taken a look at is sort of how the non-compliant sex offenders, how that may relate and connect to attempted abductions, as well as compliant sex offenders. So if they've registered in a specific area, when we see attempted abductions, we will often kind of plot them out on a map to see geographically how they're related to, let's say there's 10 attempted abductions that happened in a certain area within a certain period of time. We're going to take a look at that and see whether there are any sex offenders in that area and provide that information to law enforcement so that they can have a better understanding of where these cases may be overlapping with registered sex offenders. This team that we put together to help look at that is actually our sex offender tracking team, developed in 2006, to really look at also non-compliant sex offenders to figure out how they may be related to some of our missing and exploited children's cases. We started working with the marshals very closely in 2009, and in fact our staff members from NCMEC who are working with the marshals are co-located in the U.S. Marshal Service building. And we work very closely with law enforcement when they have any sort of technical assistance requests about needing analytical statistics for their area. So again, if they have a situation where they see 2 or 3 attempted abductions, they haven't been able to figure out who's responsible, they may have us run some searches to see what we can compute and what we can calculate. We also do help them to try to locate these non-compliant sex offenders. We do some biannual surveys of sex offender registries to determine who's registered and then to help identify who's not registered. Jay, next slide. As you can see, this is actually a map that we compute and disseminate through our website that identifies sort of where the registered sex offenders are in the U.S. I do have a couple of caveats to this slide. You'll see there are some states certainly with higher levels. You can tell by the colors. The dark green is greater than a certain number. But keeping in mind that some of this is based on the fact that some of these states may be better at registering their sex offenders, may be more watchful over the registration. So again, don't assume that just because you have some states that have more sex offenders located in those particular areas, it necessarily means that there are more sex offenders in that area. So you know, take this with a grain of salt and don't just assume that you know, we have Texas, California, Florida, Ohio, Illinois, et cetera, that are dark green, that they necessarily have a higher rate of sex offenders in those states. Next slide, please. So with all that information in mind, we really want to encourage state child care facilities across the U.S. to really consider certain procedures to keep in mind with children. We recommend doing, certainly having child IDs for all of the children that are under child care. So whether it's the fingerprinting process as well as the pictures, having those available, whether it's with the parent, the custodial parents, or whether it's at your facility, having a record of that is really important, so that if a child does go missing, that information can be provided to law enforcement quickly. And I would say that updating the picture, more so than the fingerprints, is really important. We recommend that parents have new and recent pictures every 6 months of their child. These days, obviously, with smartphones, it's pretty easy to have very recent photos of children, but if that's not available, if a parent doesn't have a camera phone or other ways of taking pictures, it's great for child care facilities to have those pictures on hand, again, if needed. We would also advocate that child care facilities regularly check sex offender registries. These are, I mentioned the National Sex Offender Registry, which is nsopw.gov. That's a great one to check for national registries. But there are also, states have different legislation around registries, so it's important to also check state and local registries. Most of those can be found online. Occasionally you may have to go to a local law enforcement agency to have access to those images and to the sex offender registry list. But I would suggest that child care staff be responsible for looking into those registries, looking at pictures, as frequently as you think would be necessary. Also, having clear sign-in, sign-out procedures is really a must. Making sure that parents who are dropping off kids as well as picking up kids are signing in and signing out to make sure that if there is ever any doubt or question about who is picking up, you have a record of that as well. Checking IDs of adults is also an important step in this process, making sure that the adult is who they say they are. Especially, child care facilities, there may be new staff who's working who may not be familiar with certain parents. And, it's important for them to certainly check IDs to make sure this is actually the person who is supposed to be picking up or dropping off that child. And then teaching children about personal safety. And again, I'm going to talk in just a minute about about NCMEC's child prevention program called KidSmarts that will give you lots of free resources that you can advocate your child care facilities use across your state. But first, I do want to take a minute, next slide please, Jay, and just mention something that we have focused on more recently on an issue that I think may pertain to some of your child care facilities. We have been working on this issue for a little while now about children with autism have special, they tend to wander or elope from environments, so it's very possible that a child who has autism may leave your child care facility and wander off. And there has been known to be attraction to places like water, to railroad tracks, to stop signs, to streets and things like that, that may put a child with autism in danger. And then unfortunately we have seen quite a number of deaths of children with autism, especially near bodies of water. There's a certain kind of attraction there. So especially if a child care facility is near bodies of water, whether it's pools or lakes or even rivers, it's really important to keep that in mind and to know specifically if the children in the child care facility have autism or have any particular proclivities to water or attractions to these things. It's important to keep in mind because when law enforcement is trying to locate a child, it would be important for them to, for a child care facility to be able to identify that to law enforcement quickly. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, there is, NCMEC has a great free personal safety prevention program called KidSmarts. We rolled this out last year, October 30th, and are really excited about the resources to help talk to children about the risks, understanding how to protect themselves in certain circumstances, and also feel empowered to report it to a trusted adult, to tell someone that something made me feel uncomfortable. And as I mentioned earlier, it's really important to just get kids to say no. Kids are really easily persuaded by adults. We talk to kids at very young ages, telling them to follow adults. Adults, if they say to do something, certainly do it. And we really need to help kids to understand that there are certain circumstances where saying no is more important than saying yes to an adult. Next slide, please. These are our KidSmarts characters. So one of the things that NCMEC has done over the years is to use age-appropriate, kind of fun ways to talk to kids about safety, making the conversations easier to have. So we have used some animation with this KidSmarts program. In fact, we have 4 videos that unfortunately I can't show you during the webinar, but I would urge you to take a look at after the webinar that talk about these various issues. And again, they're educational, but they're still entertaining and interesting enough to hold a child's attention. So next slide, please. There are 4 basic rules of safety that are emphasized throughout all the materials of KidSmarts, whether it's the videos or discussion guides or lesson plans that KidSmarts has. First, check first, making sure that the child has checked with a trusted adult, a parent, guardian, someone at the child care facility first before going anywhere. Making sure they take a friend is something we really emphasize, and especially as Halloween or trick-or-treating is coming close, we really suggest that kids never go by themselves, that they always take a friend with them. Again, that lesson of telling people no and saying it loudly and clearly, and then telling a trusted adult if anything makes them feel scared or confused, uncomfortable about their situation. Next slide, please. These are just a few of the resources that we have. We have a bunch of web articles on the website, which is kidsmarts.org. We have tip sheets for parents. We have a safety checklist, various safety scenarios that are great to practice and to review with kids. And then we have these principal activities that help kids learn the lessons, but also are entertaining at the same time. Next slide. So we have safety lessons that child care facilities can use within the classroom. Again, the animated videos, and we do have an interactive online quiz for kids who are maybe a little bit older than, maybe first or second grade would be ideal for the interactive online quiz. Next slide. One of the things that we always try to sort of debunk is the idea of using the term stranger danger. It's certainly the popular terminology that's been around for years. Certainly when I was in school, it was stranger danger. But what we know about stranger danger is actually it creates confusion with children. It creates the idea that the concept of a scary person, the person who may not look right. But when you have a man asking for help finding his lost puppy, or offering to give you ice cream cones or give you candy, that person may seem really nice and may not seem scary. So if we continue to re-emphasize this concept of stranger, children aren't necessarily making the connection between stranger and someone who's actually nice to them. We also know that some strangers are helpful in certain situations when a child is lost. So, for example, if a child is lost in a department store, for example, we recommend that the child go up to a mom who has kids and ask for help in locating his or her parent or trusted adult. Or we recommend that the child go up to someone at the store who has a name badge on. And those people are technically strangers to this child, but are also in positions of authority and help that can help advise the child and relocate the parents. So it's important, again, not to use the stranger danger concept because of that reason. Lastly, one of the reasons we recommend not using stranger danger is the idea that most abductions actually occur by someone known to the child, whether it's a a boyfriend of the child's mom, or the babysitter, or any of those, friend of the family. Those kinds of situations are often the ways, the most regularly occurring abductions. We know from the National Center's numbers that family abductions are some of the behind runaways. We see a lot of runaway cases, but family abductions are one of the most common types of abduction cases that we see. And so keeping that in mind when you're thinking about teaching these concepts. So instead of teaching stranger danger, we recommend the following. So instead of saying never talk to strangers, we tell kids, don't approach just anyone, but look for a police officer, as I mentioned, a store clerk with a name tag, a parent with children, someone who looks like they could be helpful. Again, don't say stay away from people you don't know, but more importantly, it's important to get my permission first before going anywhere with anyone. So again, re-emphasizing the rules without using the word stranger in it. Next slide. This is the KidSmarts website. Again, all the resources are free of charge. Feel free to kind of access the website, take a look at the materials, use what it would be beneficial to your state child care facilities. Feel free to recommend whatever you think they need and would work best in these situations. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Sharon at this point.
Great. Thanks, Lori. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I appreciate it, and thanks to Jay for setting this up and inviting us to participate. I'm Sharon Howa. I am the manager of NEMEC's Emergency Preparedness and Response Program. Jay, if you can go to the next slide. What I do, I've been with the agency now for 3 years, and basically go back one, yes. I've been with the agency for 3 years, and my job is to, NEMEC has a variety of different disaster resources that we utilize on a day-to-day basis that are also applicable in a disaster scenario. So we've got teams of people that can go help support law enforcement, emergency management, social services agencies with the actual physical reunification of a child and parent. If there are children who have been not only missing but are found whose parents are missing, in some cases you also have children who are so young that they cannot self-identify. We have field personnel that have the expertise in being able to work through trying to identify who that child is based on a number of different criteria. We also have great relationships with state law enforcement around the country, missing children's clearinghouses around the country, as well as social services agencies through a number of different initiatives that we're working on a day-to-day basis. So I work with states on helping them understand the importance of reunification planning, family reunification planning specifically, and also alerting them to all of the resources that the National Center offers in a disaster. So one of the things that I want to do is just kind of go through some of the classifications of children that we utilize. Obviously there's the missing child piece, which defined by law is a person who's younger than the age of 18, whose whereabouts are unknown to their legal guardian. But more importantly, in a disaster, and what we saw during Hurricane Katrina and larger sized events, we will probably end up seeing this. And these are typically children who are maybe at school when the disaster happens or at a child care facility when a disaster happens. Is a child who's unaccompanied. They've been separated from both parents, so the child is physically found, but the parents or guardians of that child are missing. And that usually puts a strain on the local jurisdiction, whether it's a local county, a city, or a state, because that involves having to care for the child, having in some cases, as I mentioned earlier, to try and identify who that child is if the child is nonverbal or is maybe too young to self-identify, and then having to find the child's caretakers, legal guardians, to try and reunify them. So that puts more of a taxing, it taxes the local jurisdiction in a little bit different way because they have to care for the child. And if, as Lori mentioned, in cases where children might have some special needs, they might be autistic, they might have some other medical needs that are necessary, and the child doesn't self-identify, this could elevate to a critical situation. So just some statistics, children make up approximately 25% of the nation's population. When I go and work with states, I typically tell them to look at what that number is for their state, to use it as a planning number, because it is important to understand just how much what the population is at that state level or even at the county level, because they'll know what their capacity is to deal with that challenge if it arises. On a typical weekday, we could see upwards of 68 million children in schools and in childcare. And that's a large number, and one of the reasons why we point that out is because it's not only the state's responsibility to have some sort of reunification plan, but now, as Jay mentioned, with the whole CCDBG law being passed, it's also the responsibility of schools and childcare facilities to have some semblance of a reunification plan, and also be aware of what your state plan is. There are a lot of states that are in the process of building their plans, and one of the things I constantly urge emergency management personnel to do is to get a sense of what the child care facility makeup is in their state, especially if it's county emergency managers, to have that link to understand what their reunification plans are, what the resources are, who to call if reunification is needed for the child care facilities, children, and being on the radar for law enforcement and emergency management professionals to help support them. Next slide. So we learned this the hard way. Obviously, Katrina and Rita were a big life lesson on many different levels, but for us in particular, it was the first time that we realized that we had a role to play in disasters. Just rewinding a little bit, what we saw and what we heard about on the radio and the news, all of us collectively, is that there were a lot of children that went missing, that were separated, parents, people that were separated from their loved ones. So reunification was a major disaster in the disaster. Reunification was one of those elements that just was not paid attention to in the planning phase of a disaster. And it, unfortunately, I can honestly say that it's still something that states are struggling with wrapping their heads around as far as a priority, making it a priority. But Katrina was one of those events that was a notice event. So we knew it was going to happen. It was a hurricane, so we had the luxury of time and awareness to be able to plan for it. And it still caused that kind of chaos where people were separated and unable to reunify themselves, and it elevated to the point where the state and the federal government had to intervene and try and get people to reunify by calling upon partners like the National Center. So what we were seeing was that families were being separated during either the evacuation phase or during the rescue phase. So during the evacuation phase, it wasn't as a coordinated event as it should have been. So there were hundreds of buses that were lined up, and people were literally just getting on them without any sort of coordination or control. And there were families that had multiple children. They were trying to all get on the same bus at the same time, but in the haste of everyone trying to get on the bus, children were being swept away from their parents and being pushed onto one bus. Parents were going onto another bus. There was no collection of information of anybody on the buses, of where they were going, and they ended up maybe in 2 different parts of the state, or in some cases in 2 different states altogether. So that was one of the issues that we saw. Another issue that we saw was during the rescue phase, where people were being rescued off their rooftops. Usually it would be a helicopter or a boat that would have maybe space for 1 or 2 people, and the parents would constantly, give the child over first, with the idea that maybe another helicopter or boat would be right around the corner. In some cases it would take a half an hour. In some cases it took a couple of hours until the parents were rescued. So you would have, again, the child going in one direction, parents going in another direction, without any sort of collection of information of who the child is and who the parent is in order to reunify them. So we saw that unaccompanied children were found in many general population disaster shelters. We also, one of the fastest, most efficient ways of reunifying anybody is having an up-to-date photo, as Lori was mentioning the child ID process. It's a really important thing to have an updated recent photo of a child, so that when they do go missing, that is the very first thing that we can push out with the the proper approvals in place, push out to the public in order to be able to find that child and reunify them with their loved ones. But 10 years ago, not everybody had access to cell phones. Not everybody had their cell phone chargers with them. Not everyone had photos of their children on their cell phones. So photos were really difficult for us to have and utilize in our poster distribution program. And then we saw a lot of families that were traveling across different states in an effort to find each other. So it turned into this wild goose chase for a lot of families that sometimes took several months. So the way that the National Center got involved is the Department of Justice first requested that we set up a dedicated hotline in our Alexandria, Virginia headquarters to handle calls about missing children. And it was upwards of 30,000 calls, and we managed them with a lot of our employees and our staff that we would fly in from different parts of the country and manage, set up for 24 hours a day for several weeks. And then also, NEMEC provided field support to Louisiana's Department of Children and Family Services to help find any missing children, or if we had unaccompanied children, to help find their family members. Louisiana set up an unaccompanied minor shelter, so once they found out that there were a lot of unaccompanied children that were alone in these general population shelters, they would collect the children and put them in a safer place that was run by the Child Protective Services and law enforcement. But we also had our staff there called Team Adam, who are retired law enforcement professionals who have many years' experience in dealing with missing child cases, as well as a variety of different other experience that they bring to the table. And they were working on a variety of different ways to try and collect information about that child so that we could help identify who that child was or is and help reunify them. So all said and done, at the end of all of the work that was done, NEMEC's efforts helped to resolve and reunite over 5,000 cases of displaced children. That doesn't necessarily mean that there were 5,000 children that were missing because of Katrina. That just basically there were some nuances to that number. In some cases, there were children who had run away prior to Katrina but were only being reported after Katrina hit. In some cases, you had a mom who would call and say her son's first name and use her last name, and a father who would call and use the son's first name and his last name. And to us, they were being intaked as two different cases until we would put in the time, work, and energy to identify the child as being the child of both of these individuals. So that the number, no matter if it was 10, 100, or 5,000, it's still a number that we have to contend with as a society. And the National Center has resources that we offer the state in being able to help them with these child reunification efforts. The last child, if you see on the picture on the left-hand side, she was one of those children who was with her godmother, and her family was chasing them around different states. They didn't have access to technology at that point, and they weren't reunified until March of 2006. Katrina hit in August of 2005, so it was many months later that they were reunified, and it definitely took a lot of time and energy and effort to make that happen. So as I mentioned before, Katrina was a noticed event, and it still went. It was as chaotic as it was with all of the reunification challenges that emerged. But it taught us a lot, and one of the things that we often say to states and to any child-serving organizations like child care facilities is that it's worth planning, it's worth putting the time, energy, and effort to create as a robust plan as you possibly can, because even if 9 times out of 10 the reunification happens organically or naturally, in that one case where it's a no-notice event, it might be an earthquake, children are at your facilities, parents are at work, roads are impacted, there's no connectivity through phones. It is the child care facility that is responsible for that child. It is the child care facility that is responsible not only for the care of that child, but also the reunification of that child. with his or her parents. And so there are a lot of resources that, that can be looked at to help in your development of the plan, and that's one of the reasons why we established a partnership with Child Care Aware of America and being able to see how a lot of the resources that we can offer can help in the development of your plans. Next slide. One of the things we wanted to also refer you to is a registry that we developed in collaboration with FEMA called the Unaccompanied Minors Registry. It is the first data collection tool of its kind, and it's basically a way for any unaccompanied children. So if it's a child care facility and something happens, if there is connectivity, but maybe phones are inundated and you can't access local calls to any parents of the children, you could utilize this registry to register the children that are, after the disaster, register all the children that are in your facility. And the information goes directly to the National Center. And one of the reasons why it's important is because we could cross-reference the information that we get about that child, and it's very basic information. If the child cannot self-identify, or if you don't know who the child is for any, and this is open to the public, not just child care facilities, it's as basic as what does the child look like and what is the child wearing. And if you have more information, the more information, the better. So we're able to cross-reference it against any parents who are calling us looking for their child, and it's a way to expedite that reunification, being able to match the two criteria together. All of the questions that are asked in the Unaccompanied Minors Registry are asked of the parents when they call, and it's a way for us to be able to make those matches happen a lot more quickly. The Unaccompanied Minors Registry also allows for photos to be taken of the child using a smartphone or a smart device, and as I mentioned, photos are the fastest way to reunify a child. So it's just another tool that the state, the public, child care facilities, social services agencies can use to help get unaccompanied children reunited faster. Like I said, the information is confidential, so it's one way directly to the National Center. It's not seen by anybody else but our workers here at the National Center, who assign case managers to the case, and we work directly with law enforcement on the ground, or our Team Adam folks who are working directly with law enforcement on the ground to ensure that that child is reunified with their parents as quickly and as effectively as possible. Next slide. So one of the things that we're doing on our website, the URL above, Missing Kids, it's .com or .org /disasters, is we have a checklist that you can share with the families of the child care facilities that basically helps them with their reunification planning. Reunification planning should always start at the individual level. And we try to encourage that as much as possible. Also on the website is a video that you can see. The 3 families featured on the pictures on the right-hand side are families that experienced separation during Katrina and Rita. The children talk about their experiences. They were as young as 2 and 3 years old, and they talk about it as if it happened yesterday, and they encourage the individual planning to take place. So that's all I have. If we can open it up to questions, I guess, now.
Well, thank you, Lori and Sharon, for that. So far, we've only had one question asked, and it had to do with the state plans, which, just to clarify, it's not necessary for a state to pass any law to mirror what's already been required in the new federal CCDBG law, and we are coming close to the end, and I guess what we could do is figure out. I will give folks another roughly 30 seconds if they have any other questions to ask, and if there aren't any, I think what I'll do is we'll just proceed to wrap up. And of course, again, I want to, really extend. Child Care of America wants to not only extend our thanks to everyone on the phone, but also our friends at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children for joining us today. They are a great partner of not only of Child Care of America, but of children everywhere, especially in child safety. And we were thrilled to have them join us today and participate in our monthly CCDBG implementation webinar. So with that, we'll bring this session to a close. Again, this recording will be on our YouTube page, hopefully by the end of the day today, and Child Care of America slides from this webinar will be on our website shortly. So with that, Sharon, Lori, again, thank you. And
thanks, Jay.
Yep, and we'll see everyone soon. Take care.